Hello dear listeners, welcome to IFFI Audiobooks. Here you can listen to crime, detective and mystery fiction. If you enjoy my content, please consider hitting the like button. It's the only way the YouTube algorithm notices me. The notifications poured in like a storm of validation. Queen. Such a vibe, always killing it with the looks. Lisa smirked, watching the screen light up with the attention she had craved for so long. No one suspected a thing. Isabella would be proud, Lisa whispered to herself, her voice laced with dark satisfaction. Over the following days, Lisa became an expert in maintaining the illusion. She used the AI software to create flawless posts, stories, and even videos. She studied Isabella's mannerisms in her older clips, mastering the way she spoke to the camera, the way she laughed, the way she tossed her hair just right. As she scrolled through Isabella's old content, Lisa came across videos of Isabella with her family, her friends. She paused, her stomach twisting for a brief moment. How would they not notice? Wouldn't they see that something was off? But Lisa was prepared. She had anticipated this. With a few more tweaks to the AI, she was able to send perfectly crafted text messages to Isabella's family, checking in just enough to keep them from worrying. "Hey, Mom. Just wanted to let you know I'm super busy with a new project, but I'll call soon. Love you." Her mother replied within minutes, her message filled with warmth and love. Lisa smiled, a dark thrill coursing through her veins. Even her family was fooled. As the days passed, Lisa revealed in her new life. The fame, the attention, the endless validation, it was all hers now. She posted regularly, each photo and story meticulously crafted to continue the vibrant persona that was Isabella. The likes continued to pour in, the comments filled with admiration. But Lisa wasn't just living in Isabella's shadow anymore. She was Isabella, and it felt intoxicating. One afternoon, as she sat in front of her laptop, Lisa saw a direct message pop up from one of Isabella's closest friends, Jessica. Her heart skipped a beat as she opened the message. "Hey Isa. It's been too long. We should catch up soon. Maybe grab a coffee. Miss you." Lisa's pulse quickened. She hadn't anticipated this. Meeting someone in person would be risky, too risky. There was no way she could pass as Isabella in real life, not with people who had known her for years. She took a deep breath, her mind racing for a solution. Quickly, she typed back. "Hey Jess. Ugh, I'd love to, but I'm swamped with work right now. Maybe next week. I'll let you know when I'm free. Miss you too." She hit send and exhaled, leaning back in her chair. That had been close. Too close. The cracks in her illusion were starting to show, but Lisa wasn't ready to let go of her new life just yet. Not when she had finally taken everything she believed she deserved. With a renewed sense of determination, Lisa dove back into her work. She would continue this charade for as long as she could, and as long as the followers kept believing, she would remain in the spotlight. But in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered, a reminder of the darkness she had unleashed. She had gotten rid of Isabella once. And if anyone else stood in her way, she wouldn't hesitate to do it again. The news of Isabella's disappearance spread like wildfire. What began as a few concerned messages from her followers quickly escalated into a full-blown local sensation. The vibrant influencer who had seemingly vanished without a trace became the subject of constant media coverage, her face plastered on every television screen and social media feed. There were vigils, hashtags, and endless speculation about what could have happened to the city's beloved online personality. The pressure on the police department mounted, and soon, Detective John T. Flynn was called in to lead the investigation. John T., a grizzled, seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving even the most puzzling cases, was known for his sharp intuition and dedication to justice. He had seen his fair share of cases involving disappearances, but something about this one gnawed at him. The digital age had created new challenges, and people were often more elusive online than they were in person. But John T. had an eye for detail. Sitting at his cluttered desk, John T. sifted through the case file, his brow furrowed in concentration. He leaned back in his chair, scanning through Isabella's last few social media posts. They were cheery, vibrant, perfectly curated, just like any of her thousands of posts before. Yet something about them felt off. He couldn't put his finger on it just yet, but his gut told him to keep digging. "Let's start simple," he muttered to himself. Friends, acquaintances, enemies, who would want her gone? John T. spent days interviewing people in Isabella's life, family, friends, colleagues. They all seemed shocked, devastated, and confused about her sudden disappearance. No one had any solid. Lisa played the part of the concerned friend perfectly. When John T. first walked into the dimly lit cafe where they'd arranged to meet, Lisa was already there, her eyes red as if she'd been crying. She gave a weak smile when John T. approached her, folding her hands on the table nervously. "Detective Flynn," Lisa greeted him, her voice wavering. I can't believe this is happening. Isabella, she's my best friend." John T. sat down, his sharp eyes scanning Lisa's face for any sign of deception. "I know this is hard, Lisa," he said, his voice calm but firm. "But I need to ask you some questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Every little detail can help." "Of course," Lisa replied quickly, nodding. "Anything to help find her." John T. pulled out his notebook and pen, his gaze never leaving Lisa's face. "When was the last time you saw Isabella?" Lisa swallowed hard, her fingers twisting the napkin in front of her. "It was a few days before she disappeared. We met up for a late-night photo shoot, actually. We were working on some new content for her Instagram." John T. raised an eyebrow. "A late-night photo shoot? Where?" "In this old part of the city," Lisa said, her voice steady now. "It's a bit run down, but it has this moody, aesthetic vibe that Isabella loved. We were laughing and taking pictures, and then she left. That was the last time I saw her." John T. jotted down notes, but his eyes never left Lisa's face. Something about her story felt too polished. Too rehearsed. "Did Isabella seem different to you that night? Anything unusual about her behavior?" Lisa shook her head, frowning slightly. "No, she was her usual self. Energetic, excited about her next project. We talked about our plans for the future, maybe even collaborating more on social media." She paused, biting her lip. "I just don't understand, how could something like this happen to her?" Leeds. But then, he met Lisa. John T. leaned back in his chair, watching Lisa carefully. Her words were convincing, but there was something about her demeanor that set off alarm bells in his mind. Still, he pressed on with the interview, letting her continue her carefully crafted story. After the meeting, John T. returned to his office, his mind spinning. He pulled up Isabella's social media once again, scrolling through the last few posts. They were flawless, too flawless. The images looked just like the Isabella everyone knew, but as Jonty studied them more closely, he noticed tiny, almost imperceptible differences. The captions, for one, didn't have the same warmth. Isabella had a certain way of connecting with her audience through her words, a casual charm that was missing in these recent posts. And then there were the photos themselves. They were still beautiful, but something felt off. The angles were just a little too calculated, the lighting a little too harsh. Jonty knew Isabella's style from his research, and this wasn't quite it. "Something's not right," Jonty muttered, rubbing his chin as he stared at the screen. The next day, Jonty called Lisa back in for another round of questioning. This time, his approach was more pointed. As they sat across from each other, the tension in the room was palpable. "Lisa," Jonty began, his voice firm, "I've been looking through Isabella's social media, and I've noticed a few things that don't quite add up. Her posts from the past week, they seem different. Do you have any idea why that might be?" Lisa blinked, her face a mask of confusion. "Different? I don't understand. What do you mean?" "Her tone, her style," Jonty continued, leaning forward slightly. "It's subtle, but there's a shift. Almost as if someone else is running the account." Lisa's eyes widened in what seemed like genuine surprise. "What? No, that's impossible. Isabella would never let anyone else handle her social media. She was so protective of her brand." Jonty studied her reaction, noting the slight tremor in her voice. He decided to push a little harder. "Did you ever have access to Isabella's accounts, Lisa?" Lisa shook her head vehemently. "No. I mean, we were close, but she kept her work separate. She never shared her passwords or anything like that." Jonty's eyes narrowed. "You sure about that?" "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like someone else has been pretending to be Isabella online." Lisa's face drained of color, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her sleeve. "Detective, I swear. I don't know what you're talking about." But Jonty wasn't buying it. His instincts screamed that Lisa was hiding something. He decided it was time to play his hand. "You know, Lisa, the internet leaves a trail," he said casually, tapping his notebook with his pen. "And I've got tech experts combing through every interaction, every post. If there's something you're not telling me, it's going to come out sooner or later." Lisa's eyes darted to the side, her composure cracking for the briefest moment. "I've told you everything I know," she said quietly, but Jonty noticed the way her hands trembled slightly. "Is that so?" Jonty leaned in, his voice lowering. "Because I've dealt with people like you before. People who think they can outsmart the truth. But the truth has a funny way of catching up." Lisa stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I think we're done here," she snapped, her voice shaking with barely contained anger. "I've told you what I know, and I don't appreciate being accused of something I didn't do." Jonty remained calm, his gaze locked on Lisa's retreating figure as she stormed out of the room. He didn't need her to admit anything right now. Her reaction told him everything he needed to know. As she left, Jonty reached for his phone, dialing a number he knew by heart. "Yeah, it's Flynn. I want a full tech analysis on Isabella's last posts. Every IP address, every device used. And keep an eye on Lisa. I think she's hiding something." Hanging up, Jonty leaned back in his chair, a grim smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. The pieces were starting to fall into place. Lisa thought she could play the part of the grieving friend, but Jonty had a feeling this story was far from over. And he was determined to uncover the truth, no matter how dark it turned out to be. Detective John T. Flynn sat hunched over his desk, surrounded by glowing screens displaying a vast network of digital trails. His office, dimly lit by a single desk lamp, was littered with printouts of raw data, timestamps, and side-by-side comparisons of social media posts. He was methodical, tracing every digital footprint that led him deeper into Isabella's online life. And with every click, every trace of data, Lisa's carefully constructed facade began to unravel. John T. leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. His gut had been screaming about Lisa from the moment he met her. She was too perfect, too rehearsed in her grief. But it wasn't enough to trust his intuition alone. He needed hard evidence, something that could prove Lisa was more than just a friend caught in the storm of Isabella's disappearance. His attention shifted to the metadata from Isabella's Instagram posts. He zoomed in, analyzing the timestamps, the locations. On the surface, everything seemed fine. But as John T. dug deeper, he noticed a pattern. The posts Lisa had made on Isabella's account, supposedly after her disappearance, didn't align with Isabella's last known movements. The photos had been uploaded from a completely different part of the city, miles away from where Isabella had been seen that night. And even more telling, Lisa had edited these images extensively, using software far more advanced than what Isabella typically used. John T. scribbled down a note, his hand moving quickly across the paper. Deep edits, unusual filters. Lisa's fingerprints all over them. Gotcha, he muttered under his breath, a grim smile tugging at the corner of his lips. He pushed himself away from the desk and grabbed his coat, determination flooding his veins. It was time to put Lisa under the microscope again, but this time, he was armed with more than just his instincts. The next day, John T. watched Lisa from a distance, sitting in the back of a bustling cafe. She was at a table with a few mutual friends of Isabella's, her face a mask of sorrow and concern. From the outside, she played her part perfectly, the grieving friend, torn apart by the loss of someone close. She laughed when appropriate, shared comforting words, even dabbed her eyes when the conversation turned to Isabella's absence. But John T. saw through it. He observed the subtle moments when her eyes flickered to her phone, the way her hands never trembled, how her grief seemed to fade the moment the topic shifted away from Isabella. Lisa was a master of manipulation, and she was playing her role well. But John T. wasn't fooled. He watched as Lisa leaned in toward one of Isabella's friends, her voice dropping low enough that John T. could barely catch the words. "I just don't understand how this could happen," Lisa murmured, her fingers clutching her coffee cup tightly. "Isabella was so careful, so full of life. I miss her every day." One of the friends, a woman named Jessica, nodded sadly. "I know, it doesn't make sense. But the police will figure it out, right? They'll find her." Lisa's face softened, but John T. noticed the sharpness in her eyes. "I hope so," she said softly. "But, what if they don't?" Jessica blinked, clearly taken aback. "What do you mean?" "Well," Lisa hesitated, her voice dripping with concern. "It's just, sometimes people disappear, and no one ever finds out what happened." The group fell into an uncomfortable silence, the weight of Lisa's words sinking in. John T. felt a chill run down his spine. He couldn't prove it yet, but he knew Lisa wasn't just talking about Isabella's fate in the abstract. She was talking about her own secret, one she intended to bury as deeply as possible. Later that night, John T. sat in his office, poring over more data. His team had finally retrieved security footage from the area where Isabella had last been seen. The grainy black and white images played on the screen in front of him, showing the desolate, rundown street that Isabella had supposedly visited for a photo shoot with Lisa. He fast-forwarded through hours of footage, his eyes growing tired until, there. He froze the video. In the dim light of a flickering street lamp, he saw two figures. One was unmistakably Isabella, her long hair, her confident stride. The other, standing just a few feet away, was Lisa. They were laughing, or at least Isabella was, oblivious to the danger standing so close. Jonty leaned forward, his pulse quickening. He watched as the two girls moved farther into the shadows. For a while, nothing seemed out of the ordinary, just two friends hanging out in an isolated part of town. But then, suddenly, the mood shifted. Lisa's posture changed. Her body language, once relaxed and friendly, became rigid. Isabella, unaware, turned her back to adjust something in her bag. That's when Lisa moved closer, her hands clenched into tight fists. Jonty's heart pounded as he watched the grainy footage unfold. The tension in the video was palpable, even without sound. He couldn't see exactly what happened next. There was a gap in the footage where the camera's angle couldn't reach, but when the girls reappeared, Isabella was no longer walking. Lisa dragged her, limp and lifeless, farther into the darkness. Jonty paused the video, his breath shallow. There it was. Proof. He picked up the phone and dialed his team. I need you to track Lisa down. Now. We've got enough to bring her in. Lisa didn't see it coming. She was at home, scrolling through Isabella's Instagram, enjoying the adoration from the followers she had stolen, when the knock on the door came. Startled, she set the phone down and opened the door, her face immediately twisting into surprise when she saw Jonty standing there, flanked by two officers. Detective Flynn, she said, her voice tight with forced politeness. Is there something I can help you with? Jonty's eyes were cold as he stepped forward. Lisa, we need to talk. And this time, it's not a friendly chat. You're coming with us. Her mask slipped for a fraction of a second, fear flashing in her eyes before she quickly composed herself. What are you talking about? We have footage, Lisa, Jonty said, his voice low but firm. Footage of you and Isabella on the night she disappeared. We know what you did. Lisa's face went pale. She stepped back, her eyes darting around as if searching for an escape, but there was none. No, you're wrong, she stammered. I didn't. But Jonty cut her off, stepping closer. Save it. We have the footage. We have the data. And soon, we'll have everything else we need. You're done. As the officers moved to cuff her, Lisa's composure shattered. I was supposed to be her, she screamed, her voice wild with desperation. I was supposed to have everything. You don't understand. But Jonty just shook his head, watching as they led her away. He had seen it all before, the jealousy, the obsession, the darkness that consumed people. Lisa thought she could get away with it, but in the end, the truth always found its way out. As the door closed behind her, Jonty took a deep breath and returned to his office. Isabella's account was still up, still running, but now everyone would know the truth. The girl they had been following, adoring, and mourning wasn't Isabella at all. And justice, however delayed, had finally been served. 4-0. Detective Jonty Flynn sat in his car, the rain tapping softly against the windshield as he reviewed the security footage for the 100th time. His gut twisted as he watched the grainy video, the eerie glow of the street lamp casting shadows over two figures, Isabella and Lisa. It was the last known footage of Isabella alive, and it haunted him. He had cracked the case wide open, yet instead of triumph, all he felt was a sickening sense of complicity, as though he had been pulled into a game far darker than he had anticipated. He had followed the trail, uncovered secrets, and now stood on the precipice of exposing something far more sinister than he ever imagined. Lisa wasn't just another suspect in a missing persons case, she was a predator, hiding behind a charming facade. This was no ordinary crime. It was a meticulously planned obsession, a web of lies spun so tightly that it had nearly suffocated its creator. Jonty glanced down at his notes, filled with details of Lisa's past, her fixation with influencers, her desperate need for attention. This wasn't the first time Lisa had tried to impersonate someone. Before Isabella, there had been others. Jonty had traced her online activities and found old accounts where Lisa had tried to mirror popular influencers, copying their style, mimicking their words, and in some cases, even stealing their content. Each time, she failed to garner the same success she craved, but with Isabella, she had gone further than ever before. "She's not just living in Isabella's shadow," Jonty muttered to himself, his voice low. "She wants to be her." He knew the time had come to confront Lisa, but not in some interrogation room. No, Lisa thrived in the spotlight, so that's where Jonty would expose her, right in the middle of her carefully curated world. The event was a glamorous affair, hosted by one of the city's trendiest venues, packed with influencers, photographers, and fans of social media fame. Lisa, now posing as Isabella, was the star of the night. Her smile was radiant, her laughter infectious, as she mingled with the crowd. She looked every bit the part of the thriving influencer, basking in the attention that had once belonged to Isabella. People clamored for selfies, complimenting her on the latest posts she had shared. Jonty entered the venue quietly, his coat dripping from the rain. His eyes scanned the room, finally settling on Lisa as she stood near the front, posing for photos, surrounded by admirers. She was radiant, practically glowing under the flashing lights. But Jonty wasn't fooled. Beneath that perfect exterior, there was something rotten, and tonight, he was going to make sure everyone saw it. As the crowd shifted, Jonty made his move, slipping through the throng of people until he was face to face with Lisa. She looked up at him, her smile faltering for just a moment before she quickly recovered, her expression turning sugary sweet. "Detective Flynn," she exclaimed with a practiced grin. "What brings you here? Surely not for the latest fashion tips." Jonty didn't smile back. He kept his expression neutral, eyes locked on her, not giving an inch. "I'm here for you, Lisa." Her smile wavered again, just for a second, but she quickly turned it into a nervous laugh. "I think you've got the wrong person," she said lightly, though her voice trembled ever so slightly. "Isabella, remember? We talked about this." "I know exactly who you are, Lisa," Jonty said, his voice low but filled with quiet authority. The crowd around them had started to quiet down, curious about the tension. "And I know what you've done." Lisa's face paled slightly, but she held on to her mask. "I'm not sure what you mean," she said, feigning confusion. "Is this some kind of joke?" Jonty stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper, but each word hit like a hammer. "It's over. I've seen the footage, Lisa. The night Isabella disappeared, you were the last person to see her alive. The last person with her." Lisa's eyes darted around the room, looking for an escape, but the walls were closing in. The attention that had once felt intoxicating was now suffocating her. She swallowed hard, but the mask remained in place. She started, but Jonty cut her off. "Don't," he said, his voice sharp. Don't lie to me. You lured Isabella out that night. You made her trust you, and then he paused, his voice lowering to a growl. You took her life. And then, as if that wasn't enough, you took everything she had worked for. You're not her, Lisa. You never were. The room was silent now. Everyone had stopped, eyes fixed on the confrontation. Lisa's grip on her wine glass tightened, her knuckles turning white. You don't understand, she whispered, her voice trembling. I didn't mean to. Didn't mean to what? Jonty asked, his eyes narrowing. Didn't mean to kill her. Or didn't mean to get caught. Tears welled in Lisa's eyes as the weight of her lies began to crush her. I just wanted to be her, she suddenly burst out, her voice cracking. Do you know what it's like to be invisible? To be nothing. She had everything, the looks, the followers, the perfect life. And she didn't even appreciate it. Jonty stared at her, unmoved by her outburst. So you thought you could take it from her? Lisa's face twisted into something grotesque, a mix of desperation and fury. I became her, she shouted, her voice wild now, drawing gasps from the crowd. I was better at being Isabella than she ever was. People loved me. But you're not her, Jonty said coldly. And you never will be. Lisa's facade crumbled completely then, the charming, composed exterior shattering into a mess of rage and despair. You don't know what it's like, she spat, tears streaming down her face. I didn't want to hurt her, but she didn't deserve it. She didn't deserve any of it. Jonty's eyes softened, but only for a moment. And now she's gone. Because of you. Lisa's chest heaved with heavy breaths, her world unraveling before her eyes. The cameras, the people, the adoration, it all slipped away in an instant, replaced by judgment and horror. Jonty took a step back, nodding to the officers who had quietly entered the room. Lisa Hartley, he said formally, his voice steady, you're under arrest for the murder of Isabella Cortez. As they cuffed her, Lisa let out a choked sob. The room watched in stunned silence as she was led away, her perfect world shattered beyond repair. Jonty stood alone for a moment, the weight of the case finally lifting off his shoulders. He had done his job. He had exposed the truth. But there was no satisfaction in it, only the grim reality that one life had been taken, and another had been destroyed by obsession. He glanced at his phone, where Isabella's social media still existed, still running with the posts Lisa had forged. With a heavy sigh, he walked out into the rainy night. The truth was out, but in the world of digital facades, the lines between identity and obsession had never felt blurrier. With Lisa now in custody, the world held its breath as news of her arrest, and the tragic story behind it, spread like wildfire. Media outlets scrambled to cover every angle of the twisted tale. Isabella Cortez, a young and vibrant influencer, taken far too soon by someone who had once called herself a friend. And Lisa Hartley, a woman consumed by envy, whose obsession with social media fame had led her down a path of madness and murder. It was a double tragedy, splashed across every headline and whispered about on every platform. Isabella's face was everywhere, her radiant smile now haunting, her life cut short in such a senseless act. She became a symbol of everything wrong with the pressures of the digital age. News anchors spoke somberly about the dangers of living for likes, of the poisonous envy that social media could breed. And Lisa? Lisa became the cautionary tale, the dark side of the influencer culture. She was proof of how far someone could fall when they lost sight of themselves, trapped in the pursuit of an online persona that wasn't even theirs. Detective John T. Flynn sat in his office, the faint hum of city traffic outside his window a distant noise in the background. His mind, however, was far away, lost in reflection over the case that had shaken him to his core. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the collage of photos pinned on his corkboard. Pictures of Isabella, alive, smiling, full of life, now surrounded by police reports, evidence tags, and Lisa's unsettling mugshot. It had been a hard case to crack, not because of the evidence, but because of the humanity behind it. John T. had seen his fair share of twisted motivations in his career, greed, jealousy, revenge, but this felt different. This was something new. The world had changed, and with it, the crimes. Social media had created an entire universe where people weren't just living their lives, they were performing them. And for some, like Lisa, the lines between reality and performance had become dangerously blurred. A soft knock on his door broke his train of thought. Detective Flynn. It was his colleague, Sergeant Ramirez, peeking into the office. "You all right? I know this one's been tough." John T. gave a small nod. "Yeah, just thinking." Ramirez stepped inside, taking a seat across from him. "It's all over the news now. Everyone's talking about it. Feels like the world can't look away from this story." John T. sighed. "That's part of the problem, isn't it? Everyone's so focused on the drama, the tragedy. But no one's talking about why this happened." Ramirez frowned. "You mean Lisa? The obsession?" "Not just Lisa," John T. said, shaking his head. "The whole system. Social media, it's designed to make people chase validation. For some, it's harmless, but for others, like Lisa, it's like a drug. She wasn't just jealous of Isabella, she was addicted to the idea of being someone else. And the more she failed, the more desperate she became." Ramirez was quiet for a moment, letting John T.'s words sink in. "You think this is going to happen again?" John T.'s gaze drifted back to the photos on his board, Isabella's face staring back at him. "I think this won't be the last time we see something like this. The pressure people are under to be perfect, to be adored, it's overwhelming. And it's only getting worse." Ramirez nodded grimly. "So, what now?" John T. leaned forward, his voice quiet but firm. "I'm going to tell Isabella's story. But not just as another headline about a girl who was killed by a jealous friend. No. I'm going to make sure people understand what's really happening out there. The dangers that come with losing yourself in the digital world. People need to see the real human beings behind the screens, the connections that get lost, the lives that are at stake when everything becomes about appearances." Ramirez looked at him, curiosity in her eyes. "You thinking of going public with it?" John T. nodded slowly. "Yeah. Isabella's life can't just be another statistic. I want people to remember her, not as an influencer, not as some victim in a true crime story, but as a person. A real person with hopes, dreams, struggles. If we can remind people of that, maybe we can stop someone else from falling into the same trap Lisa did." Ramirez gave him a small, understanding smile. "That's a good idea. The world needs to hear that." John T. stood, his resolve hardening. He grabbed his coat and motioned toward the board one last time, as if saying goodbye to the young woman whose life had been stolen. "Yeah," he said, determination burning in his chest. "It's time to remind everyone that behind every post, every filtered photo, every like, there's a real person. And we can't forget that." Within weeks, John T.'s words would be echoed across the media, as he sat down for an interview that would change the narrative of Isabella's story. The interviewer, a calm-voiced woman in her early 30s, leaned forward, asking the question that was on everyone's mind. "Detective Flynn, you've been vocal about wanting to share Isabella's story beyond just the crime. Can you tell us why this case has affected you so deeply?" John T. paused, collecting his thoughts before answering. Isabella's death is a tragedy. But her story, the real story, is a warning about the world we've created online. She was a victim, yes. But so was Lisa. They both got caught up in a world where what's real doesn't seem to matter as much as what's perceived to be real. The interviewer nodded thoughtfully. "You believe social media played a significant role in what happened?" "I do," John T. replied firmly. "When we live for validation, for likes, for followers, we start to lose sight of the things that matter. We forget that behind every account, there's a real person with feelings, insecurities, and struggles. And sometimes, those insecurities can turn dark. With Lisa, it did. Her jealousy morphed into something dangerous because she believed she wasn't good enough unless she became someone else. And Isabella, unfortunately, was the target of that obsession." The room was silent as John T.'s words settled over the viewers, resonating with anyone who had ever felt the weight of digital pressure. "What do you hope people will take away from this?" the interviewer asked softly. "I hope," John T. said, his voice filled with conviction, "that people remember the importance of real human connection. That they stop measuring their worth in followers or likes. That they realize how fragile we all are, behind the screens. And that we remember to care for each other, to support one another, before envy turns into something irreversible." As the interview concluded, John T. knew this wouldn't bring Isabella back. But it would make sure her story lived on, not just as a cautionary tale, but as a wake-up call to the world. And maybe, just maybe, it would save someone else from falling into the same darkness. Thank you for listening to IFFI Audiobooks. We hope you enjoyed the story and that it sparked your imagination. If you'd like to hear more exciting adventures, mysteries, and timeless classics, don't forget to subscribe and press the bell icon. Stay tuned. See you in the next story.